in this video, I'd like to cover some things I wish I knew before I considered moving to the Philippines. So, I don't know, about 6 months back on the channel, I think it was, I shared how I was considering going through the Philippines Investor Residency Visa program, the SIRV program. And I detailed a lot of the information regarding it, and I actually flew to the Philippines and begun the process to actually get the SIRV. However, upon getting there, I realized life in the Philippines might simply not be really for me, as well as there's some major issues regarding living in the Philippines. And these are things I wish I knew before I went there and actually went through this program, or started to go through the program. And basically this is why I am not going to be living in the Philippines. So to start off, I'd like to talk about the environment. So there's a big lack of nature and even grass or trees in any of these cities in the Philippines. So if you enjoy nature and the outdoors, you might struggle in Filipino cities. There are exceptions, of course. If you go to the south, it's a little bit better. If you go to the north, and I think it's called Baguio, it's much better there in terms of nature. However, in most of these cities, you're not going to really find much nature, and the ability to get to nature that is not completely wild or not private is quite difficult. So the situation in the Philippines regarding nature and environment is something that just really, it got to me after some time, especially staying in areas like BGC, in the capital. They have some nice trees and stuff, but they don't really have like a park, they don't really have any real nature there. It's not really, if you enjoy nature and being outdoors, it's not really a great place for this, unless you're on one of the islands. In which case you run into some other issues that I'll talk about in this video. So Filipino cities aren't really the best place if you enjoy nature or grass, trees, stuff like this. Because I honestly, to be completely honest, I couldn't find any just natural grass or any grass or trees for many days living in Manila. It started to drive me insane. It was really bad. Yeah. If you're out on one of the islands or in the countryside, so a few hours east, southeast of Manila, there's some nature not too far from you. However, getting there and just, if you're living in any of these cities, you're not going to really have that. And that's something that discouraged me because unless you live in these cities, there's a lot of other downsides that I'll detail in the video. But first, sticking to cities, as well as not really just cities, but the transportation system. That's what I like to talk about. So the transportation system in the Philippines is a mess. The metros and things like this, public transport is especially a mess. It's packed, completely packed, it's loud, it's noisy, it's not very efficient, and in my experience it doesn't even take you faster than walking. So my experience in cities in the Philippines is that you're better off pretty much walking everywhere you want to go, and putting in something to protect your ears. Maybe it's some AirPods, listen to something, maybe it's just earplugs. But it's faster to walk because of the amount of traffic there is and how inefficient the public transport is. Of course, the buses get stuck in traffic a lot, or sometimes they have special lanes, but still they don't really run on time in my experience. It's not a good experience if you try to take them, let's say that. In terms of the metro and trams and stuff, it's similar. It can take you up to 10-20 minutes to even buy your ticket to get on it if you're not a local and don't have a scan thing that they have. So it's just a mess. You're better off walking most of the time. In terms of transport to other cities, it's very chaotic. So it's the country it reminds me most of is India or Nepal. You basically show up into an area of the town that's usually not very convenient, and you have to get on a bus. The bus isn't very clear when you stop. Some people just start taking your bags out of your car. If you're not really aware of this happens, you might freak out. I was aware it happened, so it wasn't really a big deal. But they take the bags and they just start taking it somewhere to their bus station. You just gotta follow them. Hopefully you pick the right bus station where your bus is leaving from. If not, you're gonna have to move your bags across the street. It can be a bit of a mess, but thankfully we picked the right bus station. So yeah, and just the whole experience, it reminds me of India. It's very busy, it's very chaotic, it's not very clean, and it's not very orderly or efficient. Once you get on the bus, they're not. The bus isn't going to be cool when you get on it, and people come on and try to sell to you. I don't really mind this, honestly. However, then once the bus starts get going, they will play advertisements or TV very loud throughout the bus. This was my experience, at least, on a couple buses I took to other cities, because you can't easily fly to other cities all the time. So yeah, the transportation situation is not very good. As well as I'd like to talk more about flying to other places. So I flew to an island as well as another place in the south, and the issue with this is to get to the airport. If you're already in one of these smaller places, it's fine. But if you want to get to the airport in Manila or something, it's a mess. It can take you a couple hours, no matter how you're doing it. So when my wife was coming, right before we got married, to the Philippines to meet me, because we separated in Thailand, and then we were coming to the Philippines because she had to get a visa first to come with me. Anyhow, when she arrived, I had to actually walk to the airport because it was going to take too long by the metro, the private car, any of it. So I actually walked to the airport to get her, because otherwise it would have taken way too long and she would have shown up by herself in this very chaotic country. So yeah, the transportation situation is truly a mess in the Philippines. And it's something that really affects you, and it really grinds down on you, especially after being there multiple weeks. You kind of don't want to go outside your little bubble, your little neighborhood, other than very special occasions. Moving on from these more city-centric points, I'd like to talk about something that affects the city as well, but more so the countryside, but really both. So I'd like to talk about access to goods. So this is something a lot of people don't really consider when thinking about moving somewhere or relocating or even visiting. But the access to goods really, really matters. If you can't get certain things you are used to and you want, it really affects the quality of life. So in the Philippines, you can't really order a lot of things online for a variety of reasons. One reason, you don't have a Filipino bank, and you don't have their scan pay system when you arrive. So this makes some things more difficult to pay for. However, it's not too big of a barrier in my opinion. The bigger barrier is when you try to buy things online. The shipping situation is a mess. So I tried to order some things online. There's a very limited selection, but I ordered some things online to the place I was staying in BGC. And it turns out it's a very common problem. When you go down to pick up your package, if you don't pick it up within like a couple hours or less of when the package was delivered, the security guy or whoever it is, the reception, whoever it is, will go and put your package in the storage room. And in the storage room, there's hundreds of packages, and you're not allowed in there. So they will have to look for your package, and if they can't find it in about 10 minutes, they'll say, no, your package doesn't seem to be here. Try again later, we're going to organize it. And they never do. So it ends up happening where sometimes you get a package delivered and you simply can't find it. The Airbnb host I was staying with detailed this very well. He's now a good friend, actually, because he really gave me a lot of valuable insights of living in the Philippines, buying property in the Philippines, and all of that. But anyhow, he's had this problem with packages for a very, very long time. So, and it's not like you're staying in a cheaper building with lots of units. No, this place was actually one of the best places in BGC. It was, in my opinion, probably the third or fourth best condo in all of BGC. And it still had this problem. It had a lot of other problems too at the condo, in terms of building quality and just everything about it. But anyhow, yeah, that's another issue. Regarding getting stuff delivered. But the bigger issue is, it's just simply they don't have the goods you want a lot of the time. Getting the goods you want is much more difficult, and even going to the grocery stores there, the grocery stores in BGC are much better than the grocery stores outside, at least for foreigners, but the prices are quite a bit higher. However, the bigger issue with the supermarkets is the fresh fruit and vegetables are just terrible. It's one of the things that reminded me a lot about the US. Just the fresh fruit and vegetables, like Philippines, it's a very good country in terms of fresh fruit and vegetables if you're outside of the countryside. But in the city, especially in BGC, it's just awful. The quality is bad, the prices are insane, and most of the stuff is imported, which just boggles my mind. Like, why in a country where they have fresh fruit and vegetables, why is everything imported when you go to the supermarket? It just doesn't really make sense to me. It's not, it makes life very difficult, because otherwise then you have to, say you live in BGC, you have to then go out of BGC into a more chaotic area, try to find a market, try to get me stuff, then you're probably going to get stuck in traffic going back home or going there. It's just a mess. So the access to goods is really limited in the Philippines in terms of specialty goods or foreign goods or, I don't know, supplements, vitamins, whatever it might be. However, the access to even simple goods, fruits and vegetables that are high quality, is also very difficult. Organic foods, basically unheard of, it seems like to me. So this just makes life much more difficult, and it's something that really discouraged me. So to be clear, the access to goods in the countryside in terms of fruits, vegetables, and like food products that are fresh is actually pretty good. But the access to goods in the cities for those items is terrible. And the access to goods for any luxury products or specialty products or anything that locals don't consume often is almost unheard of and almost impossible. As well as, yeah, it's just not a good situation in this regard. But yeah, let's move on. The next big thing about the Philippines that really I wish I knew before showing up there is the amount of American influence. So going off, like what I said regarding the fruits and vegetables, being a lot of it's imported, it just doesn't really make sense to me in these cities, as well as just generally a lot of the lifestyle and the behaviors there, a lot of what Filipinos like to eat. Quite frankly, I don't want to be mean with this, but Filipino food to me is one of the worst foods in the world. It's very unhealthy. They use a lot of processed meat, a lot of oil. It's not the type of food for me. But I mean, I eat like vegetarian, vegan, so this would be a factor for me personally, but maybe it's not for you. But anyhow, a lot of it reminds me of living in the US. And I kind of looked past that for the first month I was there, because I was mostly staying in these cities and stuff like this. But then I went to the countryside a couple weeks, and then I went to an island a bit, and what I started to notice is it's not just the products, it's not just the culture in the Philippines that's kind of American-like. It's also direct American influence. So I started to see a lot of propaganda, organizations and different things by the US, by US charities, government, churches, whatever it might be. As well as I started to see a lot of US and Filipino military working together, as well as US military, driving alone in the countryside, doing whatever it might be. And this is just something I'm not really, it's something that's negative to me, and something that I am highly discouraged by. I don't really feel safe when the US military is heavily involved in an area and appears to be having a large amount of influence on the population and government. It worries me, especially regarding just different geopolitical situations in the area. It makes me think the Philippines is really operating as a US military base. It's not really a place I want to, it's not really a place I'll feel very safe, as well as it's a place that I feel will continue to get more and more US influence over time. So until that changes, it's not, like this was another big downside. Until that changes, I wouldn't really consider living in the Philippines, at least long term. The next big thing would be the pollution and especially the noise. So if you go to the countryside, or even the countryside, the noise is really bad. If you go to the islands, the noise is okay, just okay. But the pollution throughout everywhere in these cities is just the worst in the world, pretty much. I've only experienced worse pollution in Delhi during winter. Otherwise, I've never experienced pollution quite that bad. Oh, okay. In Chiang Mai, right before burning season, right around burning season, it was pretty bad. But Chiang Mai, Thailand. But that's only a couple months a year. In Philippines, even when the air quality appears good, such as staying in BGC, the air quality will appear good on like the AQI maps and all of this. But the actual lived experience when you're there is they have, it seems like no regulation on car exhaust or something along these lines. So you feel it, you see it, it's obvious, however, it's not blanket all over the city all the time. So the air quality sensors, in my opinion, must just simply not be picking this up. But the lived experience is, if you're along any of these streets, if you ever go outside, if you even open your window, you will get really, really toxic air coming in a lot of the time. Not all of the time, of course, and the sky won't always be gray and like looking like pollution. However, it seems like I personally, as well as my wife, as well as the host I stayed with, as well as multiple people I met who are foreigners in the Philippines, experience health effects from the pollution in these cities, even though the air quality didn't appear that bad. So this is an issue in most of the Philippines. However, there are a couple areas where it's okay. So in Davao, I believe it's called, in the south, the pollution is much better. But everywhere else, and some of the islands, it's a bit better. But otherwise, it's not very good. In terms of the noise pollution, it's really, really bad. It's the noisiest country I've ever been to. And it's not just like people playing music or anything like this. That happens occasionally, and you can look past that. At least I can. Living in Brazil, this happened many times. But what I really can't look past is just how loud the vehicles are. In Philippines, everything was an electric vehicle. I'm sure this wouldn't be an issue and it'd be fantastic. But this causes a lot of air pollution and it causes a lot of noise pollution. So even if you're staying 20, 30 stories up in this huge glass tower in BGC, you can still sometimes hear stuff. Usually not. So I intentionally stayed in one of the buildings I was next to, like the walkway, BGC walkway or whatever it's called, where it's like a very, very small sidewalk through a little bit of grass. So I didn't really hear it from where I was staying. However, when I stayed at a hotel a few nights in different areas of the city, as well as in BGC, but just closer to the actual road, the noise pollution was very bad. You could hear the trucks going by, and any time I'd walk outside, you'd get these horrible, horrible trucks screaming past, and they sound very, very loud. Of course, the motorbikes are also a mess. Yeah, I don't know. It really affects the quality of life, though. It's hard to really put into words. It's something you really have to experience, but it's best to just compare it to somewhere where you might understand more, and that would be India. To me, the noise pollution was worse in Manila than it was in Delhi. That's how bad it was. So there are some redeeming factors of Manila that I do like. However, just the amount of noise pollution just makes it where the city is almost unlivable just for that regard. The next thing I'd like to cover is the social aspects. So I think you need to be aware of the social aspects before you go to the Philippines. So pretty much all the foreigners there are retired military or otherwise old men from the UK and the USA. Most of them, in my experience, actually aren't that bad or like disgusting people or anything like this, like a lot of people would portray. However, they're a certain demographic, and if you don't fit within that demographic, if you don't share a lot in common with them, your social aspects are going to be heavily limited. More or less just the Filipinos, and a lot of Filipinos culturally and socially just aren't the same, and they're not even as friendly, in my opinion, to outsiders. So they're very friendly to your face and very friendly behavior, but they're not, I don't know how to say, maybe they're not as inclusive, I don't know. Like they prefer to just talk in local language, Tangali, I think it is. But anyhow, they prefer to talk among that, and if you don't speak this because you're a foreigner, and they understand English, all of them can speak English pretty much, however they would prefer to talk in that. So socially it's just kind of weird, and sometimes you feel a bit left out. So like that's another thing to consider in the Philippines, the social aspects in terms of foreigners. Most of it's this one specific demographic. And again, they're actually, in my experience talking to some of them and meeting some of them, they're actually not that bad. Sure, some of them would date much younger girls in the Philippines and stuff than their age. However, they seem to actually genuinely like their partners and have a pretty okay relationship. However, a lot of them are into things I just simply don't care about, like sports. So we don't share a lot in common, and it's not really a friend relationship. I found one good friend in the Philippines, and that was one of the Airbnb hosts I stayed with. Because he's also into finance, investing, living abroad, and all these sort of things. So we really connected really good and are still friends. But overall, the social aspects, you're not going to really have meetups. You're not going to really have a lot of people into health, fitness, anything like this. And just generally as a foreigner, you're not really very included. And there's not really a large population and diversity of foreigners for you to interact with. So socially, it's more restricted than most countries I've been in. It's not super welcoming and inclusive like Brazil. It's not where you have a lot of expat community like Thailand. It's its own thing, and it's not the best in my opinion for most people. So just keep that in mind if you're considering moving to the Philippines. One of the other things I'd like to cover is the living expenses. So online you might see the living expenses of the Philippines being quite low. And if you go to the islands, especially if you rent long term, or you go to the countryside and you rent long term, it is very, very cheap. Like one of the cheapest countries in the world cheap. However, if you're living in a city or you want any sort of luxury goods, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. So if you're making 5 figures a month, of course you're going to be fine. If you have hundreds of thousands in investments, of course you're going to be fine. However, the quality for the value is just not there. Example being, if you're staying in BGC, a lot of the buildings just simply are falling apart after, it seems like even just a few years of being constructed. However, the apartments, you're renting them, if you rent an apartment, it's not very cheap. You might be paying $1,000 for a nice apartment that's 1-2 bedroom there. It's just, unless you're in a noisy area that's kind of polluted and chaotic, you're not going to really get a lot of value in terms of the Philippines for how much you're spending, or unless you're in the countryside. So it's just keep that in mind. If you want countryside or island life, it can be okay. You're going to lack the access to goods, particularly luxury goods. However, it can be okay in terms of cost of living and quality of life and other aspects. Like you have fresh air, it's not too loud, all of that on the islands. But otherwise, there's some issues here regarding the living expenses. And lastly, and probably most importantly, after living in the Philippines for over a month, I started to realize just how bad the economy was. Especially after talking with many people, and just the economy in the Philippines is a mess. Like, just keep that in mind before you invest in it, before you go through an SIRV program, or before you live there. Like, the economy is a mess, and this results in a very unstable environment, politically and socially, in my opinion. So, without outsourcing jobs to the Philippines from the US, a lot of the call center and stuff like this, the Philippines economy would, in my opinion, crumble. And this is a very dangerous place to be in, particularly with the developments in AI and a lot of the automation that's going on. I feel like the Philippines might not have a very good economic future ahead of it. And this would affect a lot of the stocks or other investments regarding the investor visa program. However, those stocks are very cheap. There are some very cheap ones, so it might still be okay. As well as there are some precious metal stocks and things like this. But overall, I feel like the economy is not very stable. It's not very diversified, and it's at risk in the coming years, which presents a politically unstable as well as a socially unstable environment. And my experience there, as well as the experience of the other people I met who have been living there a long time, is that Filipino people, they speak English, and they're not they know what they're doing. They can be competent in doing things. However, they're not very ahead of the curve in terms of learning new technology or adapting. So most of them aren't really up for like learning AI or learning more advanced things. Most of them are more or less happy and content just simply going to a call center, working there, buying a small apartment, and all of this. They're not super entrepreneurial, in my opinion, and the extent of their big dreams is not learning a new thing or building a new thing. It's more like leaving the Philippines to go work in the US or go work in Hong Kong as a nanny, whatever it might be. So yeah, with that being said, these are the things I think you really should know before considering moving to the Philippines or even visiting to do the SIRV program or anything. So yeah, with that being said, if you have any thoughts, questions, or want to share your own experience regarding being in the Philippines, living in the Philippines, or visiting the Philippines, feel free to leave those down below. But with that being said, bye bye.